Yeah.
Let's say the physical is matching the news. Look at the news. Look at the news and then see how you're feeling. And then you may start to see, okay. But literally, blah, you're feeling more blah now or without energy?
It's just I had an episode, one of my episodes, and then I'm slowly, I still feel nauseous a little bit, and not great. It's a general feeling.
You can keep in touch with Mary, Brenda, even Spiro with the beard, and Janet, especially, also just schmoozing, but just touching base throughout the day. So you have somebody to give you a kiss goodbye if that's where you're going. You'd like to have a kiss on the way out, or even a kiss to hang around.
Yes.
What's your feeling now?
I feel totally in unknown territories.
Yeah.
It's like one day at a time, one moment at a time. I don't know. It's like, should I call the doctor? Should I? Yeah.
You came on late, so you didn't see these. Tuning forks. And so, he had given me this a month or so ago, and I never did it, but I was also there, but you show it on the head, though. Do it on the head and on the body. But independent of that, you could look it up a bit more and see that it's not something, even that is one you can do. But also then the book on it is very difficult to read because it's so remarkable. But what he's also saying, one fellow here, but then as you look it up, you see the exploration with it, what kind of ailments you may be having. But not literal ailments, but a kind of corrective. But then there was also something called the fifth point. What was it again? The flatted fifth. It was in bebop, but he's likening it to music, and that sometimes you'll play some different kinds of musics while you're doing a session with this. But your session has intention. So in other words, this says, I'm having a feeling with the eye that I'd like to be connected to. So let's say that's the dopey part of it. But then as you read the book and you try it, it's nice to, if you have something like this at home.
Yeah, I love the sound.
Yeah, but then you could take the sound into the body or move it in different places. And then you can even create flows with it, supposedly, as you learn it. So what I felt, there are places that are doing it now. I guess it's becoming popular, but there are 2 or 3 places that I saw in town that are doing their version with also writing.
What's the name of it? What do they call it?
These are tuning forks.
Tuning forks.
But the names of the places are what? Sound, usually sound therapy.
Sound therapy, okay.
Sound therapy is one, or not sound meditation. But taking it out of that,
yes,
self-treatment is what I'm talking about.
Biosonic.
Yeah, or it's biosonic. And they do have sound healing and values visualization. And then he's premising that once you do it, so this fellow is, but what we want is not to so much throw ourselves into it, but make another thing that we just have available to us that's more, has that creative sense to it, rather than treatment or whatever. It's just allowing you to appreciate.
I call them tools for the body.
And you also understand that what is happening to you is not what is something wrong, that there is a juggling act going on. Hmm? Okay, and you and I are specifically in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
You should take a look at this if you can.
Yes.
Maybe they have them in your building there. But it's pretty goofy, but not so much. As you read it, and you read the guy's book, the sound visualization, it's a hard book to read for the 5 element sonic fields, tuning your body movements in the concert space, which emotions you can bring up. So he's making a claim on everything, that you can then somehow use sound to introduce you to the whole hidden network.
Yeah.
But that once you are introduced to the hidden network of what's really happening in your life, where not only what's happening in the outer world is happening, but 90% of what is happening is unknown to you.
Yeah.
And it could be as dopey as the smallest thing in your body or your being, but you see a remarkable creative interaction is taking place that you have only a sense of. Because to have a full sense of it is to kind of have had the death experience, where death is no longer a challenge that way as finality, because you see the energy carries on. So the form is not the owner of the life anymore. So the body and the history is no life. So then you, from a perspective, you see the history of you has been an aspect of the life experience. That form is one part of the life experience somehow. And when it takes form, things take on identity because they move in time and space in a literal way. When they're formless, time is not literal. Time is a fragrance, like a fragrance or feeling, or it doesn't have literalization. But as it comes to gravity and literal time and identity, then the person's life supposedly is when they're born and when they die. I'm dying. I think I'm dying. I feel like I'm dying. Yesterday, it was so weird. I felt more dying than living. But the dying and living was almost like you stayed in a hot room while you were living, and then you went into an air conditioned room to dying or something. It was just another room or something. So not to schmutz it up too much, but it is schmutzy.
Yeah.
And schmutzy meaning at times you almost laugh at okay. And at times you almost laugh if your knee is complaining. And you say, are you kidding, man? We've done so much for you. Stop it already. So you talk to the knee as if it's a person or something like that. So let's say it's a time.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that there are moments when you say, holy shit. But you also see that somehow now that you have a kind of choice, not the choice of the ego or the mind or this or that, but that you have kind of creative choice. And it can be as dumb as, but it's not so dumb. You see the brilliance of living another week to see the end of the last TV show or something. And you see, it's not so dumb. You see how much you have to manage time and space and structure. And so once you illuminate the living, the self is not so much the main factor. Making choices is not so much the main factor, because you see that it's more creative choices than literal. It says what spice to put on the dish while you're cooking it or something like that. You get an idea and you try that. So you see that now much of your life is more creative. And even in the situation that you're in that seems literal, you see how much it came out of some weird dream. So our normal is creative simultaneously. And any movie can come out of the moment. If you go downstairs and take a walk, you may run into something that a movie may come out of that. But still, I feel that a situation that we're in has voluntary, not like literal voluntary. but creative voluntary. Do you want to see the end of the movie?
Yeah.
No, I don't
Yes.
like it that much. Let me go. But somehow it has that. So what is happening is that one is kind of manage the pain that comes with the literal failing of the body and situation. But there is also now a psychic pain that is not, it's, at times it's a pain because it's a pain in the ass when it comes into your memory. But then you're starting to find out that when something comes into your memory, there's also a literalness that's in the wings in some way. And that somehow you find yourself to be a tuning rod, like one of these things here, for your own life. And so you see that there are elements that you see that almost happened for you where there could have been a big fight or there could have been a big kiss. They were both waiting there in the wings. You dirty rat, or you lovely angel. Okay. So let's say right there in 1 minute. And so then you also see that the movie is the reality. And the exact elements that are important in the movie then become important in your life. And you see that somehow in the movie, survival is not that important. It seems the experience is important. And it seems to me that what is happening is that the experience is important. To be there for it. Not only as a helpless schmo waiting like that, but to be there for the story.
Yeah.
And but at the same time, from a perspective where the relationship is no longer historical or any trip, it is coming from a similar place. In that, perception is the mode. In other words, a hidden world is revealed to you because you're able to be with it. And the hidden world, you can see that one is pushed away.
Yes.
In order to survive. At the same time it was seeking that world, it was avoiding it simultaneously. So there are nuances in the body and the being that suggest a need for love, a need for feeling, all the things that escape the literalness of life.
Yeah.
Or the logic of life. Because with those feelings, when they happen, it pushes logic to a different place. Or the lovers may decide to rent a house. So logically, to get a place. But there's a feeling that allowed them. So once the feeling creates the expression. But then what happens is the landlord has a contract for 5 years and it may not last 5 years, or the feeling is pure in itself. The people may struggle with the different physical relationships to the feeling that they've had. So somehow the feeling gives them a story. And as the story becomes the reality, it's almost as if the feeling is observing the movie of our life. And the feeling seems to be, its one literalness is feeling is experiencing. That it's come into the body to have this experience. And the experiences that we avoid in the literal is also the experiences that something in us is attracted to. So you see this remarkable creative event of what a life is. And the idea that it's literally this or that, or comes from that, or has a literal color, or a literal gender, or a literal country, all of these are evocative aspects of the experience. And it somehow is important that one comes into the story from an innocence and assumes the identity of the story. But they are not the identity in fact. So this pre-identity, I feel, comes in with the story. and has the experiences of you, but it's not the doer, it's not the runner, it's not the hoper. It purely is with the experience of what it means to be alive and to take a shape and a form. And it has a date with itself after the experience of having had a life.
Mm.
So I think that the life and death is a bye baby and hi baby kind of experience in some weird way. We are experiments somehow with an energy. And it seems to me that the birth element and the death element is a conversation with the same energy that had the experience of a story. Now, this may be coming to me just sitting here as I am, but I also feeling that I've been living that way in the last months or so, where somehow the literal aspect of what is happening is an aspect of it, but not the fact of what is happening. But coming from the creator space, we'll say one step out of it, the entree into the literal world is coming from a different place where survival is not the dominant force. Survival is the caretaker of an experience.
Mm.
And experience can, from that energy, can be this, but from our energy, experience is time and space.
Yeah.
So I say one has come into a place and naturalized an existence. And yet there's always a kind of feeling that one is not the identity, that there's another calling. And I feel that is because there is another calling. It's not some kind of, so now some may become hokey, some may become religion, they try to literalize it or whatever, but to me, the energy is always in flux. And when you literalize it and capture it into a system, it leaves the thing and kind of laughs at you and leaves the system. So you see your relationship, you could even call it God or energy, but maybe there's too much of a trip around God energy, but it's around God energy. That no church is going to capture it. What will happen in the church is important, is the failure of the church is an important experience. When you are built to have the experience and there's a kind of failure of the literalness of form, and you see what is the failure is the mind's attempt to own the story. So the very revelation that's inherent in a life is resisted in the mind's experience. But to be there for it means that the mind is no longer organizing the experience. Okay. So I felt that when we were even kidding around last month with what was happening for you, that it had elements of being there for something, and it had elements of, that's one of the, if you need reasons, that's one of the reasons that one is hanging out. It seems that there are still elements in flux. And that it should be really funny. Let's see what goes down. Now, what's going to happen though if you go out of it and there's no one there to squeeze your nose or anything? Should you alert them downstairs? What do you say, Kai? How does she?
I don't know.
Let's have someone. I mentioned before that Dr. Kaushik, as long as we knew him intimately, would always be concerned that of a heart attack coming. He had 4 or 5, and that element was there. So I think that relationship to you, that folks check in the morning to see if you've made it overnight or not. So that comes with friendship with you, is a check-in to see, and if you were going, if there were friends around, would you slip out quietly, or would you sing something?
Oh, it's,
You try to be
I
cool.
don't think I would be singing, but you never know.
Let's say we take away the pain. Let's say you find some way of through self-reading or whatever, or what we're talking with this fork here. So you can do this. Oh, mother jungle. Holy shit. Or you hit your knee. Oh. Why don't you look into it? Take a look into these, okay? But I'm wondering if they show you how to. I probably would. I may go to a place where they do it or and get a treatment. But my feelings, I didn't want a treatment. I wanted to have my own sense of it, you know. And it is probably interesting as you touch it. It is.
Oh, yeah.
What something was Kai was talking about in some way, where like there's a kind of conversation with the tissues and stuff like that, but you see energies. Now his premise is that once you have it, you can then kind of push the pain a little here or there, you know, into different. So he's saying that there's somehow a conversation going on with the sound that has an effect on the cells and situations that are happening. So he's introduced the whole lifestyle in the book. It may be go a bit far. I'd like to know how to do it, but reading some of it, it's called Sound Healing, A Life of Value. But I wouldn't mind adding it to our kind of sense of things, you know. So I have a self-treating element of doing the clubs. I have a 16-hour fast overnight. Generally, or letting, it's not so much a fast to me as much as the body processing the day, where the active part is only one part of the living, you know. So it's pretty much shaping and creating the life. And so that's what the release of sleep was, where you saw that sleep is also is a friendly. It's not something that you have to kill or fight over or make happen. That is a friendly. And that is because it's trying to live a certain literal style of life that, and it's trying to bend the body. When the body may still have a more natural flair, it resists going into a natural world, you know. So just like the kids would resist going to a world that they don't like, the body probably would resist going into a world that it doesn't like, and then you would have to persuade it and push it and pressure it. Okay. So then you see, but then you then run into that the instinct may have been entirely correct. You know, that somehow you discover almost in retrospect. I stepped into a store and I saw how heavy the lights were, almost like knocked out, and they were all talking and walking and laughing and eating.
Yes, yes.
Whatever. And I said, oh, it was like they were sending rays at you.
Yes.
Bright lights and hold it, okay. And the normalcy of it. So you see the normal every day has these rays shooting at you all the time.
Yes.
And these things happening and these schemes going on in the food. And so one walks into, but somehow we navigate through this form. And somehow it's second nature to us now that we know that those lights are heavy duty.
Mm.
And yet we also understand that people are in there, that they're having problems and this and that. And even arguments will come out of being too much under the fluorescent light,
Yeah.
you know, and because it's argumentative kind of lighting. It's just so weird, isn't it? So let's say that somehow we've kept some sense of a natural light.
Yes.
And because natural life meaning a kind of attune to a feeling in yourself that the literal world itself is not enough. And that somehow you have a relationship with something else in the life that sometimes you have to hide or keep secret or only share with someone that you have feelings for. It opens up. So then it looks like it's secret, and has psychological elements to it. But then as you examine it, you see the underpinnings of it, that there's a creative act that has a purity to it. Meaning that the painter and the viewer have a holy shit experience, where they experience the soul of something in the moment, perceptively. Okay. So you see that element, that the painting is looking for that. There's someone to walk past and say, holy. Okay. And life is organized somewhere around that. It has the humor of holy shit, but it interrupts the karma, where one thinks they are this identity, that they are, do come from this family, this little number is them. And then they work to make this number of theirs secure in a future. So they organize a future around the number of security and organize a life around that. The folks I'm speaking to and know will be absolute failures in that systemic logic. Because while they were doing it, they were looking for girlfriends or boyfriends that interrupted their careers and did this. But what they were looking for was a life that was not so organized that way, that was adventurous, that opened up a doorway. So even if it ends dumbly in the literal world, it's not so dumb as an experience. You see then that the energy almost drove you to have an experience that was against all logic and circumstance, but that there was a magical experience hidden in the logical situation. And what was the magical experience? That as dopey as it was, there was a broken heart in it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Then you also saw, when I met Mutananda and I was there in Rishikesh and the others, you saw in the mantra a broken heart. You saw in the Shanti, in the Shaktipat, a broken heart. Now, the literal community would think it was ailments and problems and this and that, and issues. But to some, it was a spiritual experience that logic wasn't the medium. Is that when you are somehow aware you're in a spiritual world, then there are certain things that will be faults or flaws for you. That's why then you see why they went to confession, and even though they were innocent, because then once you are in the spiritual world as your life, without the trip around it, you see then you have to compromise in order to live in the literal world. And so there's measurements of compromise. And they say, why? So we look at it purely and they say, because the love you're searching for needs to be somewhat pure. And that ain't laid out. But let's say, put aside the church element of that, the structure element of that, and then you kind of come to the creative dimension of that. That somehow in all the fields, in the music, in the movies, in the church, in the things, not selling out is somehow everyone knows when it's sold out and when it didn't sell out. So that's what they're saying. If it sells out too much, it loses the relationship to an energy, which is based on a kind of you being in a space.
Mm.
So when you're not in that space, so you see what happens when in fact you literalize the world and have to compromise something in yourself to some degree, you lose contact with that thing also. So you start to see life also not only being lived on the literal sense, but it becomes very important to you, the life being lived in the creative sense, where the literal life is an aspect of it, not the entirety of it. And so then you start to have, for me, open up certain senses. And then I say forgetfulness that allows one to survive. You see how brilliant it is, and for the world to forget in order to continue, and to then make its own version of history through forgetting. And so then you see, okay, the brilliance of continuity, and you see how they're employing forgetting in a larger way, in a general, but then you see in yourself the forgetting that had avoidance in it is now the forgetting that is seen by the author or by the director of the thing as a creative act. But what you have, what the shift in forgetting is, you forget your hurts. You forget you're getting even. You're forgetting your, not because it's wrong or right, but you see the other dimension that it was written into the script. You view the life then not as yours, and you see almost, holy, it was almost all written. Almost everything was not in a literal sense of writing, but in the creative sense of looking at it unfold. And so the aha that comes to you is not the literal aha of I should have done this, I should have done that. It's the aha moment of meeting your own life from a perspective of not owning it, not holding on to it, but having a relationship of the viewer for the first time seeing it, as others may have seen it all along. While your neck is hurting, Arjun.
You know, it's not as hard to take as the nausea. The nausea, it's like, it's a total discomfort of like, I want, something in me wants to get out of it. It's so uncomfortable for me. You know, some people can be nauseous and move around, but for me, it's very hard to.
What did you say, Janet? She says nausea is because you're French.
Well, that could be.
That was Danny's.
It wouldn't be nausea if you were American. It would be throwing up. So, but I understand. But is it overwhelming? You mean amounts or just a reflux?
Well, I guess there is always a fear of getting worse. You know, like that. It what's after that? You know, but it passes. You know, the fear.
It's funny, no. I mean, I'm not to make it funny. I'm sorry that is this?
No,
okay?
it's okay. I want you to make it fun.
That we're kind of exploring dying and living in a normal.
Absolutely.
Kai, what do you feel?
Yes, please explore it. It needs to be explored.
To me, it's amazing at the same time that we're talking, oh, yeah, sure. Okay, I'll see you later then.
Yeah.
And the moment before that, we were just talking about the physical life being an aspect of the experience of the energy. That kind of, from my experience in some ways, as I'm having from being out of it to some degree, it seems then that the literal life is one aspect of what is happening.
Yes.
And the people are involved in the literal world think that what's happening on that TV show is happening, or it's not happening, or it's a plot, or it's real, but somehow, okay, you see, your literalness of happening is that it's happening as much as all of a sudden the wind just blew the door open, and that's happening also. And you see there are happenings all over as you walk around the back here, you go through. So you're in a world of happenings, and one of the worlds of happenings is this literal world of happenings. But then they presume themselves to be the entire existence.
Yeah.
So somehow they presume what they're doing to be what the universe is about, but when they're literally in a zone. So, and from the zone that we're in, there's a kind of helplessness in the theater. It's not a movie we would watch. So somehow it's allowed us a life as a parallel situation to the news of supposedly what is happening in a larger picture, to our connection to humanity, to people, to existence. But then as you explore it, you see the very thing that you see in the literal sense supposedly is happening to the environment. and you see that somehow it had to do something immediately to overcome some momentum that has been created, or at least have a change in the way of seeing it or thinking. Okay. And so they campaign and have a fight, but presumably if you see it, a shift takes place perceptively. And then you see the drive. You see the one who sees them will experience a world on the other side of the broken heart. Because you see that there's a drive to its own destruction, at the same time there's a resistance to it. And that these elements of life, living and dying are in a dialogue. And then all forms are subject to that conversation. You see a dialogue going on in your body.
Yes.
Especially when it's accentuated, where immediately a light goes off and says, uh-oh.
Yeah.
It may be this, and I say, come back here. It's not maybe, it is. I've been working with myself and a few others to buy some time to play with. So my relationship to treatment is relative, because I don't want the treatment to come out of fear and trying to force something or whatever. I want it still to be a kind of affectionate relationship with the body and the being. Now, I understand how naive that is, but it's really not naive. It's a true vision. You'd like it to be human.
Yes.
And you don't mind if it's not human, to surrendering the form. If in fact, okay. So let's say these conversations are going on in one anyway. They may not literalize it as this or that, but there is a living and dying conversation that you have access to elements of. And you then have moments that are physical, that are flashes. And I think it was in this New York Times, was it Tuesday? They kind of described almost all of us in the sense of, if you get this or that, or if this happens to you sometimes in the day, or forgetting this or that. And I say, okay, check this, check that, check this, check that. And I check them for you, Urja, also.
Thank you.
I checked all of them for Jai, if you're listening. So if dying is in the picture, we died already. We lived longer than we were supposed to in some weird way.
Yes.
We've got this block of time.
It's true.
And so I feel it is, in fact, a conversation. Sometimes it's a negotiation. And sometimes it's a conversation. And then sometimes it's, what happens then is that what you would hide from yourself normally and lie to yourself and sneak to yourself, and you then shed light on that mechanism in you that divorces you from your own happening. Not as, but you saw it's brilliant. You see that in order to carry on, you pushed aside what was happening inside of you into tomorrow and mañana, and I'll do this and do that. Yeah. So you see the brilliance of the director in organizing everything towards an experience at once. But once that becomes eliminated, then it is no longer automatically around survival.
Yeah.
Then somehow there is a creative dimension that enters into the story. And that means that you see it from the other side to some degree. And then you understand the other side may resemble a director or the making a film or writing something or putting something together, a kind of creative purity that you're looking for in it, which is not the literal purity of the world. It's a purity of not selling out your soul, that somehow there's a soulful enterprise in the creative expression, then there's a heartfelt one, and there are different levels, and then there's, and then it literalizes. As it literalizes, it starts to lose contact with it. Because survival becomes the medium, then it looks for the most commercial aspects of itself. So when survival is there, one looks for the most selling point. Okay. But through the expression, one has access to this. You see, you can move from the soulful into the literal world. You bring elements of it. So that means there will be some accident that happens or something that looks like an accident, but will kind of send you to reflection on this place in yourself. Even while you're continuing and doing your role, this medium is actually happening for me.
Yes.
That
yes.
an outer circumstance then sends you to a place that's happening, but your awareness of it's happening is a privileged space. Because then you are talking to dying in a conversation. And then you kind of understand what prayer meant in some way for the moment, that you were literally in the most innocent as a kid. That's why I say as a kid, it had the innocence to it, didn't have the object so much, but it was a conversation that was assured by something. As much as a touch to mommy would be or something like that, a touch that would assure you that the world made sense in some way. And you see a magical existence in the normal existence. And you see your own life as this strange movie of navigating, experiencing, taking different forms and shapes, but you meet you. And you shakes your hand, says, very nice job, Arjun, you did well. Okay. You did French lady.
Yes, I did.
And you had the whole damn French lady experience.
Oops.
Now you have some extra time.
Yes.
It seems we have extra time. I don't want to count on it. Maybe I'll do this again. Another 3 hours or something. But why not look into this, Erja?
Yes, yes.
I don't know that.
I'm sure there's someone doing it.
It's a real thick book. You know, I've got all these books here that I still have I dip into, but I've got about 20 books. And this is heavy reading, but interesting reading.
Yeah, sound healing.
But it does open you up to people. They've been doing it all along. There must be people in in your neighborhood.
I could probably order that book.
But it's not so much for me in getting treatment as it was in kind of having your own self-treatment situation.
Yes, yes.
So check it out there. Hi, Kerry.
I will. Thank you.
Hey, Denny.
Oh, hi. We were just talking about these tuning forks. Are you familiar with them?
I am familiar with tuning forks, yes.
You use them? Yeah, you use them for the guitar. Right? Now we're using it for the body.
Yes.
Body treatment. I was just looking at it, and there's also a gong treatment. There's also Tibetan bowl. Are you familiar with the Tibetan bowl? The sound that you get out of letting the body and the sound resonate with it. And so, in this fellow's theory is that. Boy, I'm getting an echo effect. How come?
Yeah, there's something echoing, Carrie, on your.
Okay, I'll try to mute.
Everyone was echoing. That was like a choir.
It's reggae style.
I think he says you should do this tuning fork with Frankie Valli singing in the background or something like that. Okay. But anyway, look them up, see what you think. But the other dimension of them is that this guy takes you into a lot of areas, from the creative area to the arts to mindful listening, this sort of thing. So let's say you can take an excursion into it. I certainly wouldn't want to make a career move with it, but I can see where having a running sense of it will be okay physically. But then since you explore areas like that, around that, it may be okay for you, Kai. What do you think?
And who is that?
The guy who wrote the book?
Yeah.
Well, the book is called Sound Healing and Values Visualization. But if you just look up sound healing and then see whatever you find there, you may find something down the block or something from you. You know what I mean? That people are doing it now, I saw when I looked at it. And it may be that once you learn it or get a certificate from them, there may be a course that you can then teach it. But basically, our feeling to me would be, I like to have a sense of it because I found it interesting when I did touch with it. Certain elements were happening. And I am also seeing the something of what Kai sees in body energies and things like that, but from a different perspective. Re-entering the story since I'm seeing in almost all energies now, not so much literal about anything. And so this had a, since he gave me this as a gift and I started to look at it, I haven't really done it. My doer is not such a big deal. And reading this book seems like it'll be a year away. So I may look to YouTube or something to learn a bit more of it, and we'll see what Spiro also knows. But for me, it's more self-treatment or having something just like any exercise you would do or something you would do if you want to get flexible or do something. So it would be as natural as taking a walk. I'd like it to be that. You know? Uh-oh, Spiro just jumped on. So this has been a very hanging out kind of conversation. Is anyone visiting or seeing outside?
We have a few people. Jimmy, Sophia, and Suleiman.
So this question that I've been stumbling upon, where the things that are normal in the life are then a light is shed on it. And you see the normal life has been a remarkably creative life hidden from you. It could be known to everyone around you. You discover it, they know it. And let's say I used an example years ago that when I was a kid in a neighborhood that I was growing in, an Italian neighborhood in Brooklyn, there was a story that my mother had and family had, and that the whole community knew, but I had no idea what the hell was going on. But people knew each other's stories and backgrounds and who did what and who they were and so on like that. And it became a structure that became part of the story. Even if the people were happy with each other or knew each other and were friendly, the story became the reality. But then you discovered the story because you didn't create the story or experience it that way, but were affected by it. And you, in discovering it, it was different than knowing it. In fact, the knower had no idea what it was to discover something. The discovery sent you into another place. It shifted certain life forces of your own history, what you presumed your history to be. And you discover a whole other element that you come more from a mystery. And then as you discover mystery and history simultaneously taking place, as you even start to grow up in life, there's a creative aspect that investigates the mystery and the history simultaneously. So then if you hear of the certain superheroes, you also start to investigate and you discover they're also simultaneously people. But that somehow the peoplehood had to be suppressed in order to maintain the literalness of the
Right.
And so always the wish in life was somehow, and then even if you saw the person made $1 billion, then they were a prisoner of the $1 billion in some way, and the ramifications. And somehow there was no way out of the continuity. that somehow the continuity reassembled itself, where you just assumed another identity, but had the same thread running through.
Yeah.
But that is, you assume the identity on a larger scale. There was a dehumanization that was taking place as you left the rest of the planet behind. And your world then consisted of something, your own backyard or your own structure or your own, through your own lens. Then you see that empathy became more movie than it became actual. So 1 million people there or 10 million people here became logical. That if you were a developer, you had to move 1.5 million people outside of the Bay Area, outside of, they said, but won't you mess up their lives and this and that? So you see a work in progress as a constant. And you see a machinery, a money-making machinery that's organized around money-making. But what it is as long as it's a money maker, it can lose empathy.
Yeah.
It can lose touch with the human feeling and then start using imagery of human beings and to get money. Then you watch the humanity flow, that it takes away the humanity to have an image of humanity become the reality. And then as the image of the reality becomes a reality, you start, to some degree, you lose creative sense with it. Because it's a challenge to join it as you kind of start to feel that it's phony. That the pure reason is something that you've kind of not had in your life and when you've tried not to do. Was to kind of sell out something in yourself that you don't even know what it is, but when you get close to it, you could smell it.
Yeah.
So somehow you don't have to know what it is, and somehow you can smell it at a certain point, or you'll hear it, or you'll feel it, or some clunk will happen, or you'll fall down, or some mistake will happen, or whatever. But you see, there's a hidden force that's pushing you away from doing this thing, and it looks like you're falling down or getting sick or nauseous or whatever you are. But you see, it won't let you do something. And I say, holy shit, can there actually be a dialogue or a conversation that doesn't go into weirdness, that includes one's life, one's body, one's situation, but that the premise is that what you took for granted, you now see that there's an agreement. And the agreement doesn't have to be one on paper with your knee or your back or your body. It's the agreement that you have with a love to take a walk. You don't have to sign a contract to do it. There's a common feeling, and all of a sudden, the people time themselves. I say that kind of feeling is there with the body also. When it doesn't, when in fact it assumes a natural, based on the feeling. I feel then you open up a different conversation with one's own body that is very much a conversation that one would have with someone who loves each other. And so the naturalness of their routine would be very challenging if they had to learn it and was forced and so on. But then when the people who have affection for each other assume a routine, the routine is a kind of naturalness that comes second nature to you now. You'd like it to be second nature to you now. And so you'd like it to be that you're kind of having a conversation with your body in a way. That's almost having a conversation with your daughter as a child. You remember sometimes that you had to speak to her? Okay. And then sometimes that you had to calm her, and sometimes you had to kiss her and reassure her. Well, meet your daughter as yourself. Is that too dumb?
No.
And so let's say that somehow someone has you caring even more for them than you're caring for yourself. And that you'll put aside sometimes your wishes in order to care. So let's say the medium is there already, but a new experience is there where one's body is not a possessive, but one's body and one's soulfulness and one's heart are all elements of similar you. Hmm? And so death is not the this and the, all the hope in the story, in the literal story, even though those are really scary. The fact is that you're managing something that we're kind of sharing with you. So I can say I don't think it's going to happen while we're talking with each other anyway, that we're both going to go. So that the space that we're sharing is allowing us to make more of a movie of our life.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm? But I also feel that we take that element out of the meeting where you do see, in fact, without it being too delusional, that in fact is more movie than it is anything else. But movie being kind of holy or sacred in a way, you know, seeing something. And then you see the beginnings of the creative expressions must have been an attempt to locate the energy.
Mm.
You see, even a Shakespeare must have been an attempt to have a conversation with the mystery, with the energy that normal people didn't bother with. But when they were exposed to it, there was a holy shit moment for them because they saw what their normal day had all these deep hurts in it, angers in it, struggles in it. What was normal to them was amazing from the perspective of a Shakespearean sense, where you saw the thread running through the story, the hidden dimension. And so once you saw that there was a creative tracking of this experience through the form, your relationship somehow came, once you assumed the creative life yourself, where you've assumed the creative identity and expression, then you see your relationship is with this flux, with this creative movement in the story. So you see many attempts to locate the energy, and you see it's a multi-level experience. But to be with it is to kind of almost die in what we think of as death, the ending of time and space and identity, and to sort of come back into the space from a different place where length of time is no longer the dominant force, but experiences. And the shared experience becomes a dominant aspect because it's no, one comes back into the place from an I and thou relationship. In the absence of a person and in the presence of it. The absence is then memory, missing, all these other elements awaken. And you see almost one is a creative act. There are moments when you see the attempts to reach that through acid and other things. Now, is that a before you or not you, not literally you being the owner of the story, but it also sees your moves. And so let's say you can you make an end run around the thing you don't want to, okay. And they say the thing you're talking about is watching you make a move. So let me say, okay, I'll go to Elliot's now. And so it's watching me make a move. And I say, okay. What do you think, Derek? And they say, no, it cannot be a trip. You cannot act. You got a nice life, Derek. You could have really been messed up so you're pretty cool. So let's say if you're exploring, you're exploring. You're not a poor guy trying to get rid of your mother's influence on you. Is that an agreement?
Yes.
Okay. So then when you go into an exploration with others, it's like going into making music together. There's an integrity of form in it.
Yeah.
Meaning no trip, not one's making a buck off the thing or this one is doing, but that somehow, as we mentioned earlier, where there's a shared creative act is what one attempted to do in a hard in a movie because there are so many extras and so many trips happening in it. But somehow, for everyone to be excited about it had meaning, whatever level you were on. But in the earlier expressions, for everyone to be on the same page without force or pressure or power was rare. But there were moments when it was a shared experience, and the sharing opened up a doorway or something. So the space that I was just referring to, where somehow all the elements of survival dominate us, to some sense surrender to another aspects when it's not survival in terms of length of time, but it is more to have the experience that somehow you're here. It's not literally that way, but somehow there is a calling between you and a dialogue happening in absence and in presence. And you have whole experiences with it. You experience a loneliness that is not loneliness, but is soulful. So I feel that there is a dialogue with the mystery. Mystery meaning that we can't see it, we sense it in different ways, but we can't literalize it. But I feel that through certain creative processes, one's life becomes a creative process also. And then you don't see it too, you see the aloneness has a relationship to an otherness. There's a dialogue going on all the time between living and dying, between lovers, between this, and there is a conversation that looks like opposites. But in fact, when you examine it deeply, you see that they are talking to each other. And you see that it's the everyday, that living and dying as a process to us. And we see living, even though we intuit and we know dying is in the story, in the literal story. So we know the literal story is not the exact story, that there are other aspects. If you see the dying process no longer as a threat, but actually you see the many levels of it, creatively, structurally, socially. And then you see some ruling population managing the living and dying of the social fabric. In terms literally, that somehow even the powers that be have an agreement that they can get rid of this population, they can move that one over, they can do this, and what will you do? And you find yourself in a conversation that they've been having, that they think is normal. And you see the inhumanity of moving blocks of people and this and that and getting rid of those, and as if it's normal. And then it comes to the people as a mystery, something that they already know. So you, of course, when you perceive the elements of it, you no longer are directed by that world. And it's not so much that you even have a fight with that world. You see where you can navigate that world, but basically your relationship comes more to what we'll call the energy or creative energy that takes many shapes and different forms. And then I feel when that feeling is there in you, you can look at the different religions and you have a feeling for the sense that runs through it. Even to the dumb sense where you feel almost your life is a Jesus life. You experience the feeling of it, no longer the storyline that has a motive, but like that. And you see a Buddha from the bus and you get off and you have a conversation and you see it's a Buddha conversation that interrupts the story. And so I see when I'm talking with some of these old geezers really who are on the edge there and very interesting. It's almost like a Buddha conversation in the normal conversation there, because it does come to some, even if it's dopey and even if the people disagree with each other structurally, there's a moment of a kind of enlightenment of seeing something. And that was with the one fellow who was said, man, look, you can't own Jesus like that, man. Your version can't be okay. So you can do your version if you wish, but okay. They said, well, what kind of version? I said, there's a lonely guy version of Jesus. There's a happy guy version of Jesus. There's a rich guy version of Jesus. There's a short guy version of Jesus. So pick your Jesus, but Jesus is the experience, not the short guy or the tall guy or this or that. You have a moment where you experience Jesus in your own life in that moment. So then it is not a mystery or a belief or anything that you have to do. You intuit exactly the thread that runs through it because it's happening in your own life. You see, no matter how much he shouted at the world, the violence carried on, organized and captured into. So then you see that people experience that in their everyday, where they may not even be able to convey to someone, hey, watch out, don't do it. And they say, who the hell are you talking to? Or something like that. So you see a Jesus element. If Jesus would have come, be careful with that. And they say, who the hell are you talking to? We'll kill you. Okay. So then you meet Jesus in yourself, where even if you mean well or care for the other, you run into a story, a literal story, where you can't say, like a Jesus sense, hey, can't we all work this out and have some sensible conversation? Yeah? Like Jesus said, he said, do you ever see Jesus having a sensible conversation? They try to kick his ass all the time. Maybe it's when they felt ashamed of themselves. They may have met themselves. And they said, well, that was the difference in shaming, where you try to shame that had a motive, but experiencing being ashamed of yourself, overseeing, okay, seeing something in retrospect. You see, shame was a doorway of perception that somehow you had to feel so deeply that it revealed itself in a way. It had to be true. There's an area in your being where the experience has to be true, and it's not true in the social structural sense. It's true in your own creative life. So then you see shame as not being shamed. It may have those elements in it, but as having the experience on the other side of it. You see that there is the other side of Jesus being shamed. And shamed. Imagine being shamed. They were shamed, laughing, hurting, kicking, stabbing, doing whatever shit they were doing. That on the other side of the shame was another dimension. Because it was so inhuman to force into a shaming. Because the premise was that they were godlike or they had God energy. Okay. So let's say that from the perspective creatively, shame also has another dimension. It has a literal dimension in the world. And I feel that from what I hear, there's a shaming culture going on, even commercially and structurally, almost in every way. Even with businesses are being shamed. So it seems that that supposedly is happening. But the other element of shame is something opens up that you can see, that you could not see and have survived. Because when you see it deeply from that perspective, you see an I and thou life. And you see that it has been the relationships in your aloneness that has been the experiential dialogue that you've been in. And you saw that the absence of that realization had shame in it. Because from the perspective of the energy, survival is not the main ingredient. So then in retrospect, every time you see that you chose survival, not the caring of something, but so let's say you distinguish the move. And you see the brilliance of the move in life. You see how many lives that you've lived. You see how many forms that you've had. And they've been natural. But then you see it from a perspective of not you owning the story. And you see that it has been a work. That the life itself that just naturalizes has been an artwork. And once it's revealed as an artwork, it brings in a kind of sacredness that is not so much the woo-woo or rules-oriented sacredness, but it's the perceptive sacredness that there's another dimension happening while you're in the everyday. That's not so much dependent on your belief. You could even say, thanks, belief, but we don't need you any longer. You see it. And then you also see a relationship to a Jesus or a Buddha or to the energy or to a friend that illuminates. Is a relationship to the energy. Somehow it connects you or contacts you, even in memory, to a conversation. At that point, as you start to perceive it deeply, you start to see that the whole life, it's as if you were a movie maker, but now it's no longer committed or logically that way. You say you are a movie maker as your reality, as your being. You see it from many dimensions. You see the surface story has many dimensions going on in it. And as you see it, those dimensions also enter into your own life. And you, at one point, you start to see some voluntarism, and in the automaticness, it is not the automatic. You start to see, as you become aware, you are then invited to participate in your own life from a different perspective, not knowing it, but in caring for it. And you see the difference between that the owner cannot reach the level of care perceptively until it's the owner has to experience the loss of it before it can experience the care of it. But when the care is natural to you, then you may have moments of challenge when the literalization of it takes place. Oof. Long conversation. What was it again?
Thank you for the magic, Danny.
Thank you. We've actually, but give these a try if you like, okay? Let me see. Sound therapy or whatever they're called. What do you think? You think you'll give
I'm going to look into Tibetan balls because I used to enjoy listening to it.
Balls are also, but now let's say this question that I've been raising in the last months of talking to the body, not as the body separate, but coming to understand that there is a conversation going on. You become aware of an I and thou. So when you're looking for a relationship, you become aware that you've kind of avoided relationship, the primary relationship, yourself to yourself, your own being. So you meet, and as dopey as it can be, your knee hurts, and you're not trying to correct it, and you're not pressuring it, you're investigating or exploring it, and you meet your knee not as your knee, but as something that you're meeting for the first time. And then as you meet it, you see the care comes out of the automatic meeting. You took the knee for granted until you met the knee. In meeting the knee, you find a miraculous apparatus. You've taken a body for granted.
Yeah.
When the body itself is a remarkably weird thing. It's like you got a brand new car and it broke down and it kind of needs you to look at it. Okay. So then basically you see creatively you can manage time and space if you wish. And you're doing it anyway, but now it's illuminating.
Yeah.
So you're still leaning towards wanting to hang around more. Well, then you see the question that is bringing to you, what would it mean, this and that. Okay. So to some degree, we're trying not to be organized into the literal world, that way of treatment and this and that. That's still, and the premise that we have lived a life and that we hadn't imagined before, that somehow it escaped our imagination, escaped everything that we're doing. And I can't say Is that because you live this long because you take juice or something? So I would say that somehow you've had this to play with. And I do feel that you can talk to it. Now, I'm not suggest. If you want to make it literal, you can do that and actually literally have a conversation with an itness. But I'm saying you aren't talking to it just like you're talking to a child if it's crying, and you're talking to it and you're holding it, and all of those elements are talking to it. It's not you talking to it. It is a kind of conversation that if you were lying on the couch together and experiencing something together, it's a conversation of a shared experience, not a separation. So there is a conversation that you may have with the processes that are happening in your life.
Yes.
And you find out that dying may not say, May 27th at 9:30, I'll be picking you up. And I said, hold it, you don't talk to me that way. I don't know if I'll be home May 27th. How about June 4th instead? So let's say, however goofy it is, you find out yourself. And it does have dates. And it does have this, in a weird way, its own day. And so you enter into the conversation where your karma is not the boss of you any longer.
Mm.
You then find out that like you're with your boss telling you what to do. Then all of a sudden you find out they need you and this is happening. Now there's an honest conversation that it's a shared experience. So when it's a shared experience, the job changes from a literal job to people who know each other agreeing to be with each other. That agreement is different than survival and the other thing. Okay. It comes from a slightly different place where there's a shared experience. So let's say you're having the agreement inside your own being, that there's an agreement going. And I feel what you're discovering is what's happening. It is not so much that we're creating the agreement, is that we're discovering there's an agreement already. And in the discovery of it, you see another dimension is awakened that is hidden in the story. Of course, the being on many levels is talking to itself and talking to its environment and having conversations. It's as simple as understanding if you go out in the sun and you feel the heat, of course your skin and the outer world is having a conversation. And if it, okay, and there are variances in it that it knows if it's too much out there, it'll get burned. So how brilliant it is already. And to discover that interactive conversation is to illuminate something that was been hidden in plain sight, where you're not as subject to, but you see the creative environment for you. And you see somehow it's experiential. And to some degree, your spirituality is caring for the experiential, the essence of it. And that somehow that when you are involved in it, you will discover a parallel population that's also involved with some dimensions of it in the same way. And they kind of speak each other's language as if it's natural. Although it's a foreign language to the rest of the world. And I say, why? Because you have to stop to some degree. There's an interruption of the literal life, of the survival life. And it depends on how deep the interruption is. If in fact it had trust or elements or whatever, it's built that way. You start to see that your life becomes a quest. So you see even the hurts that happen to you were based on the quest that you're on. The artificial world captured the essential world, where love became hate, where love became literalized or something that, or possessive or lost. But that the initial feeling had an innocence, but not as a possessive. It didn't belong to one. There's an experimental energy within the being that is slightly different from the literal person having the experience. So there's a history, but in the inner being, it's a mystery.
Mm.
And so time is a mystery, and so it's not so much limited to the literal time. It can, depending on where it's coming from, it has the experience of memory. And if it has the experience of missing and memory, you see it's almost alchemical process that the being is in, that they've had their experiences. And you see different aspects of the experience reveal different dimensions of the life. Where you start to see more this parallel life that has been existing with you all along. While you've had a literal life, you've also had this dream existence, or what looks like a dream existence to a literal existence. It's more seeing it from a different place. And let's say if in fact you experience your life has been a quest at the same time that the physical elements were there in survival, you also store in survival when you got a job, you were looking for a lover or looking for a boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, you saw that there was a look in the literal world of keeping it together, where conversations going on that were hidden, creative conversations that may happen accidentally between people accidentally meeting each other, and that somehow it had to be accidental without motive, literally.
Yeah.
But you discover parallel processes going on all the time in the everyday. And when you discover that, you start to look at the everyday from a different place, where it is not only captured around survival, being the organizing principle, but somehow the deeper you see it, the more a creative life becomes important to you. And as a byproduct of the creative life, there's earning. But the survival gene is not the dominant gene. You understand, from that perspective, money means freedom from money and the structures that are existing around it. But freedom from doesn't mean licensed behavior. It means that you're free to create. And if you see the life as a creative process, the history is not a dominant force in you. You see, you came more from a mystery, that these people who were supposedly parents and this and that were simply people living their lives like you. But you meet something you didn't meet because you thought they were people who knew what they were talking about. Then you find out that there were people who were acting like they knew what they were talking about while they were going through some hard times themselves. Okay. So for me, when I discover that, I can say, thanks, Mom, for looking out for me, or something like that. You see the story, because I must have been heavy for some of the circumstance you were going through and to manage the kids and all that. So you see it not from owning the story, but seeing the thread that runs through it. Because in seeing the thread that runs through it, you interrupt the karma of repetition. And my feeling is that supposedly where we come from, we kind of repeat in the literal sense. But when it's perceived in the evocative sense, the life then is seen from a different place. So you see, feelings allowed you to see naturally something that if to someone else didn't have the feelings, their logic would be the predominant force. But somehow you see that feelings can shift logic into a creative expression towards the experience. Even if you look back in retrospect and you see what was really dumb or this or that, you see the purpose of the dumbness, that there was an inherently experience. And in retrospect, you see the life of experiences is not based on your body alone. You can see, you can imagine them, you can see. So they're not based on your body in birth or death either, I think. I feel that they're in flux. And that it does seem to me, as you see that, you see a remarkable thing which is not based on knowledge or the mindset of knowing. You see that the mindset of knowing is a practice inherently inside the body and inside the form as a literal life, where people are literal identities. But then you also see in memory that people are energies, hidden identities. So then when you have a life with people and the relationship is with them around the energy, it has somewhat of a relationship to the literal existence. So let's say we may meet as friends or something like that, and then each person goes back to their family or their literal reality. But we explore a dimension that's a bit different, that is not confined to the continuum, but is to the depth of being. And I say, can one then experience this deeply and translate that into the literal life? Are there how-tos in navigating? And I say, much of the creative life navigating through the forms is experiential. But what has changed is that your relationship to the experiences that you have are no longer possessives, but somehow the experiences that you have are giving you insights into something. So when you get hurt, you experience how much of a diminishing of a circumstance takes place. You see, then you see the hurt in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you see when the hurt is there in a literal sense, it's actually two people having a fight with each other that are running the world. You see, it's as stupid as that shit. And one is saying, you old bastard, and the other is saying, you short mother, whatever the hell they're saying, they're insulting each other and hurting each other and pissed off with each other. And here, where aspects of that situation, where if you were in a room with them, you would see a whole different story going down. You would see how personal it was, how much of a trip, how many angles they were having. So we are strangers in a strange land, and being in it but not of it. And in not being of it, it kind of rolls off us in a way. That somehow our health is not the health of rigorous trying to keep it together, but the health of being human. And so that comes to the eating when you look at it from the human's perspective. Then you don't have to fix out what kind of diet or not kind of diet. You see the human looking at the world as a naturalness to them. And so I feel that coming from that perspective, then one looks at the situation from that, where the aim is not to own or to possess, which is the navigating elements around it. But let's say perceptively you're coming from a different place creatively. So you see the literal situation from a different place. Even getting a job would be it would be like a movie. Excuse me for that. So is it possible that one re-enters a story where they, even though they see the literal life and what is happening, they also see the evocative life that they've inherited, that they've normalized? And that you're meeting with people in that, where that space that you're in is part of it. So you see that you carry, in people seeing you as you're walking down the street or over there or here, or you're meeting people, they also see the processes that you're in. As you can see, and people you're caring for are helping and seeing where they are in the circumstance, and how confusion is not really confusion, but confusion is allowing the space, allowing some space between you and a process that's happening. So let's say it's a confusion as a kid when you're born and then you start to come into puberty or something like that. It is a confusion that happens to you, that all the world knows what's going on, but you're subject to it. You're subject to your body changing and this and that. They're telling you in the church to sin, you have to go there. It's a sin. But all you are is confused, but you have this remarkable imagery and you see a process is happening in your body to have family, to have life, to have children, that your body is becoming you, supposedly. But somehow it's a mystery to you, even if they give you the history and they say this and that, it's still a mysterious force that's taking place. And I say, why? You say, even if it has a history, it's still a mystery. That we take it as normal, the human existence, right? And I say, if you saw it from the angel, where you got a chance to come in as a human and you jumped at it, even if it was scary, even if it was cool, even if just to have the damn experience, you have a sense of the existence where you see that somehow it's not a literally choice of the ego, but that somehow there was a force that agreed to have this experience. And that its desire is to have the whole experience, the whole human experience. And so somehow you find out, naturally you've been managing the human experience. And naturally you've attempted for it not to be artificial or dehumanized. So naturally one has been caring for their life. And that is somehow, it comes as selling out, but it's not exactly selling out. It's you reach a place in yourself that is natural in the world, but you also understand is selling out for you. And then you see that it's not exactly selling out, it's that you lose touch with that energy when fear or manipulation take over. Because once it's forcing you, it's then forcing you to live a manipulative situation and a creative one. So the juggling act is remarkable. How do we live in this world? And I say, when you come into the place where the identity is not you, but the human being in you is you, and that you assume the identity of the situation, then let's say you're human, that you are assuming different roles. But you'll run into a roadblock if any of the roles that you assume force you into being inhuman. So let's say your human is having an experience and it's meeting others. And there's a conversation going on. And from the human perspective, it's important that it doesn't have what you would call, unless it's goofing and laughing at it, the jive inherent in the literal world of, hey, baby, haven't I met you, as a kind of motive towards a thing, that somehow, even though it looks like an accident, is kind of hidden in innocence. Because what it's asking in the innocence is a shared intimacy. But now it's no longer the intimacy of being strung out or hung out or sexually hung out, but now it's the innocence that comes with a kind of real love. So somehow one assumes there's a naive character around that because there's somehow no trip around that feeling. So when I say innocence, I'm not talking about dumbness, stupidity, or whatever. I'm talking about not coming from survival as the dominant force. So that's why usually innocence slips by through accident or something like that, but it's actually brilliantly conceived to get past the ownership of the person or the possessiveness. So something that instantly reaches a conversation that is hidden in plain sight, but a soulful moment, shares a space that is not the literal space as much as an evocative space. As you pass that person by or remember them or whatever, you remember the energy. The energy is coexisting as a constant. Your capacity to be with it or see it is also based on your capacity to be with it or see it. That's a variable. It's not a possessive. As a possessive of survival, you get hints of it.
Yeah.
But the breakthrough happens perceptively where it's not you owning the story. So it usually comes with deep failure, soulful failure, not as a practice or whatever, but generally as a place that's, that you see that soulful failure in one sense is an experience essential to the authenticity. Because from the failure, you no longer have the history. You come back into the purely creative act for no reason, no money, no this, no tripping. Your relationship is to the energy. Now, experiencing that, living that is extremely a challenge. But we are doing it anyway. The only thing that shifts is that at times it's illuminated. And when it's illuminated, you see the thing from a different place, and it's not around the survival of the situation. It was around the experience. And when you perceive the life as around the experience, you look deeper. Because the survival only looks deep enough to survive and continue. But as you look deeper, it starts to change the milieu that you're in. You see dimensions that were hidden to the doer. And you see oftentimes why sometimes you may be a failure in doing, because you have to leave a creative process behind to some extent towards the survival or the continuity. So the exploration of something interrupts the continuity, and it reveals worlds that are hidden in plain sight. And when those worlds are revealed, it's a shared experience. When people share a moment that's heartfelt, they've created something in the circumstance that's a bit different than the literal life that they're in. They shared a momentary experience that kind of gives you a peep into the life that you're living. Now, when people attempt to learn Buddhism or Christian, and then introduce it into their life as a literal form, you see then it's the incorporation of the experience into a literal experience. From my mind, the literalization of the spiritual experience, as if there's a code around it, or if there's a structure around it, when I feel it comes from a very different language than the continuum of language. That it has it's always been talking to you. There's always been a conversation. And somehow the conversations are awakened because they're no longer around how to or what to do or anything like that. You become aware of an energy that's having an experience of living. And then you become aware of yourself as a vehicle of that experience. And so the elements in the experience are somehow the shift of a creative process where time, space, all these are part of the creative space also. So let's say your age gives you a sense of what the weather is. If you stuck your hand out, you see it's cold or not. So your age gives you a running sense of literal time. But that somehow the life itself is a creative act that you've been caring for. And caring for meant at times you thought you owned it. But if you continue to own it, it dumbs down the situation somewhat. So the owner is a phase that it takes to care for something, not to possess it. I feel that when you have the perception of not owning it perceptively, but caring for it, presence becomes more important. Like the memory of you, the integrity of that relationship becomes part of its memory, has its coexistence, where you see that the life is not confined to one's own body, but is shared in another's existence. And you see not only the carrying on of the form being a life, but you see the memory as being as valid as the repetition of the body. You see it existing, the relationship existing on many levels. That there was necessary for it to be a form once that released the energy, but it doesn't own the energy. And when the energy is released, it is experienced on many levels. And so you see a life when, even if we read history and we look back on life and we see, but then we also have the common feeling of being a person with the person. So we never lose the personhood or the beinghood. So the history and the mystery are parallel. We know that. And how do we know that? If we were there around Jesus and they lived across the street and everything was happening around with us, we'd have had an intimate relationship with what was happening. We'd have known the characters in it, in this situation. And so then seeing it and then reading it 1,000 years later in history, you would see, holy shit, this is what happened. When if you were living there, you thought a different thing was happening. That the young people were getting in trouble with the authorities again or something like that. So it looks like that. Then in retrospect, you see it was a whole movement of energies. In retrospect, you have access to another world where it's seen from a different play. My perspective is that both experiences are important to understand what it is to have been in the situation by being in the situation, and then seeing it as it's described 1,000 years later with those who haven't had the experience of that moment. The dual experiences are transcendent because you understand the difference between history and mystery then. And then you understand, when you understand the difference between mystery and history, then you kind of understand Jesus as you. Not you as being a vaulted person, but you as having that experience in life. And so it's second nature to you, not to believe as much, to have a shared experience, because you see that Jesus didn't believe. And that the characters that were hanging out with him didn't believe also. They were winging it. They were finding out. They didn't have a law to fall back on. They had a relationship, they thought, in their mind, to God, to the feeling, to something really cheesy that was going down between people and to each other. So it seemed to me that when you have a relationship to that humanity, then you have a relationship to people being treated with some humanity. And if you take a look in times how people have been treated, holy shit. So then I think that we have an instant relationship with the spirituality of it before it's incorporated into a business, into a logic, into instructions. You see there was an essential feeling shared that then becomes a thing, that then becomes what you have to do and how much you. So the thingness runs away with a story that is essentially an essential feeling story. But once having those essential feelings, the life is shifted, where it's not so much around survival in the same way. But the survival is an aspect of a certain experience that one is having and sharing. Okay. Is that okay today? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very nice. I'll be but do take a look at these tuning things.
I
See
will.
if you find out, or and Derek, see if you find out further. Maybe something in the neighborhood. Or also, it would be nice to have them at home. What do you think? Oh, I'll let you know if they're nice. I'll see how far I go with it. So I'm advising something with you that I'm also, I don't know that I'll be able to read this book fully. So damn. But I wouldn't mind just having the thing available. It looked like it was pretty cool. So check it out. Is that okay, Derek?
Yeah, I'm interested in that for sure.
Yeah. Okay, everyone. I'll see you. Hopefully, I'll see you
Thank you.
tomorrow night, Derek. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Danny.
Thank you,